The Ex Libris, a Bloomsbury Bookshop Mystery by Imogen Penrose. A book comes through the letterbox of a Bloomsbury bookshop on a Monday morning, before the shop is open and long before the post is due. No stamp, no note, only a bookplate, a heron standing among the reeds, and a price pencilled inside the cover in a hand that Cleo Marchmont knows at a glance. It belongs to the woman who used to price every book in this shop, and that woman is dead. This is the Ex Libris. Chapter 1. The Monday Book. The letterbox of Marchmont and Bell went at 20 minutes to 8 on a Monday morning, which was wrong in 3 ways. The shop did not open until 10, the post did not come until 11, and Boswell had been sitting at the door since 7:30, tail wrapped over his feet, with the air of a cat keeping an appointment. Cleo heard the flap from the kitchen at the back, where the kettle was gathering itself for the second effort of the morning. She came through with her tea, and found Vivian at the door with a book in both hands, turning it over the way she had once turned over interesting moths. The brown paper lay on the mat where it had sprung open, the string in a figure of 8 beside it. "No stamp," said Vivian. "Good corners, mind. Somebody was taught to rap by a person who knew how. The string was not consulted." In the early light from the shop window, Vivian looked the way she always looked now, like a photograph developed a shade too warm, the green cardigan a little greener than green ever is. Cleo had stopped noticing months ago. She noticed the book instead. She set down her tea and took it from her hands. A copy of Cranford. An Everyman edition, cloth boards, the spines sunned to the colour of weak tea. Nobody had dog-eared it. The softness was all in the hinges, the way a book goes when it has been opened often and opened with care. "Mrs. Gaskell," said Vivian at her shoulder. "Cranford comes back to people in their 50s as a rule. Nobody reads it at 20, and nobody stops at 60. There was no note. Cleo gathered the paper off the mat, shook it out, looked inside the fold, ran her thumb along the seam. Brown paper and a yard of string, and that was all. On the front paste down, the leaf glued flat inside the cover, was a bookplate. Engraved, not printed, a heron standing among reeds on one leg, with the patience herons have, and beneath it, in small capitals, Ex Libris, Iris Otway. From the books of Iris Otway. "Otway," said Vivian, trying the name the way she tried names against shelves. "No." She raised her glasses on their chain and considered the bird. "A good heron, though. You can tell a lot from a bookplate. This one cost money the owner thought twice about." On the flyleaf opposite, the free leaf facing it, in the top corner in soft pencil, £1.25. Cleo looked at the price for longer than a price deserves. 11 years of cataloguing had taught her that a hand is as particular as a voice, and she knew this one. The pound sign done in a single stroke, the 5 with its mouth left open. She had been reading that pencil since her first week in the shop, in margins and ledgers and on 10,000 fly-leaves. It was Vivian's. She opened her mouth. The knocker went, twice, civil about it, and the morning arrived all at once. It was a man from Tobin's with 2 boxes, the remains of a library Cleo had bought at auction the week before and not yet looked at. House clearance Highgate, somebody's idea of a working collection, sold by the shelf. Boswell inspected both boxes with the thoroughness of a customs officer and found nothing to detain. The brown paper from the parcel, folded on the counter for reuse, had been claimed by the time Cleo turned round. He sat on it with the finality of a date stamp. The day did what Mondays do. A tourist bought a map and asked the way to the British Museum, which was 2 streets off and the size of the British Museum. A regular came in for the new Persephone and stayed 40 minutes for the fireplace, which was not lit, but which held the idea of being lit. At 4, a student sold back 3 paperbacks and left with 4. At 11, Vivian had taken her tea at the window seat, in her own cup, the 3rd button of the cardigan missing, as it always would be. The tea was more idea than tea, and the steam let the light through, but the cup had been hers for 50 years, and the arrangement suited them both. Cranford sat behind the counter all day, and twice Cleo caught herself checking it was still there. It was not until the last tea of the day that the morning came back to her. She was at the little sink in the kitchen, washing the cups, thinking of nothing much, when she remembered the bookmarks. They had come on Thursday, a parcel from the printers, and the parcel had sat on the mat for the best part of an hour because Cleo was busy with a customer. Vivian had stood over it the whole time, complaining about the draft and the state of the mat and the modern approach to string. She had not squared its corners. She had not so much as nudged it. In all the months since Cleo had come to the shop, Vivian had never once picked up the post. For the same reason she never fed Boswell and never lit the fire. Things that had entered the shop since her death were beyond her. They might as well not have been there. And this morning she had been standing at the door with the book in both hands, criticising the string. The paper had stayed where it fell. Only the book had come up. Cleo stood with the tea towel in her hands, not drying anything. Then she went down, put the lamp on behind the counter and took out the ledgers. Vivian's ledgers were in the same soft pencil, 1 line to a sale, 40 years of them, and they were the tidiest things she had left behind. Cleo started with the classics and worked by title, because that was what 11 years in the sale rooms, cataloguing for auction, trains into a person, and because it postponed the part where she thought about what she was looking for. She was looking for a Cranford. Any Cranford, any year, any price. Somewhere past 11, Boswell came down and took up his position on the counter, facing her, tail over the half-white forepaw in the attitude of management. A church bell somewhere counted 12. By then she had been through more years than she had meant to, and she was sure of it. No Cranford had ever left Marchmont and Bell by any door the ledgers knew about. Chapter 2. The Heron. The second one came the following Monday, at 20 minutes to 8, to the minute. Boswell was at the door by 7:30, tail over his feet, on duty. Cleo, who had spent a week telling herself nothing else would come, was on the stairs when the flap went, and at the window in time to see nobody at all. The Diary of a Nobody, this time. A paperback, an Oxford World's Classics with a printing date of 2009 on the reverse of the title page, which made 2 things wrong before she had it out of the paper. Nobody puts an engraved bookplate in a paperback. Somebody had. Heron stood in its reeds on the inside cover, patient as ever. Ex Libris, Iris Otway, and on the first blank page in the top corner, in soft pencil, £2. The ledgers gave what they had given for Cranford, which was nothing. Cleo started a list and pinned it inside the counter drawer. Cranford, 1853. The Diary of a Nobody, 1892. Not alphabetical, or not for long. Nothing to do with value. The 2 together would not have covered the window cleaner. She looked at the list for a while, then wrote across the top in capitals, "What order is this?" and felt better for having asked somebody, even if it was a drawer. She waited until Wednesday to raise the matter of the pencil, which was a mistake, Wednesdays being what they were. "It's your hand," she said, holding the flyleaf up to the light. "Your 5. Your pound sign done in 1 stroke. And there's no sale in any ledger in this shop." "The ledgers were never the whole story," said Vivian with dignity, and went away through modern fiction to supervise the poetry, which was behaving itself. By the time she reached the far shelves, she had gone the way old photographs go in sunny rooms, a shade fainter at the edges. It was a Wednesday, and Vivian had never been able to manage Wednesdays, for reasons neither of them had got to the bottom of. Cleo did not think the day was doing all of it. On Thursday evening, she put the Heron under the lamp with the glass Vivian had kept for book fairs. The plate was wood engraved and good. The lines had the discipline of a burin, the engraver's steel pencil and a steady wrist, and the whole thing was work in the manner of the 50s, when a bookplate still meant a visit to a man in an apron and an argument about herons. The printing had browned the same amount in every copy. One batch, run off long ago and used ever since. The local studies room at Holborn Library keeps Camden's dead the way Vivian had kept her ledgers, one line at a time. The electoral rolls had an Iris Otway in Kentish Town at the same address for 40 years, and then, after 2003, no Iris Otway anywhere. The Camden New Journal had the rest. At home, in her 81st year, a schoolmistress, retired, sadly missed by her son and her granddaughter. The notice did not run to names, so the books were not Iris Otways, or not all of them. A woman who died in 2003 does not paste her plate into a printing from 2009. For a day, Cleo entertained a story about the clearance trade, men who strip plates out of dead libraries and paste them where they please, and the story did not survive contact with the pencil. The prices were the shop's. The books had been stock and had left without passing the till, and every one had been marked, after the fact, as belonging to a dead schoolmistress who could not have owned half of them. It was less like a library coming home than like an apology arriving in instalments. On Friday she took the question to Diana's, along with the soup of the day, which was leek, and did not last long. "Otway," said Diana, in the voice she kept for crosswords. She wiped her hands on the apron and had a think. "No, and I would know. Kentish Town isn't abroad, but it isn't Lamb's Conduit Street either." She took Cleo's bowl away and came back with a flat white that had not been ordered. "You want the clearance boys. They swap book plates about like cigarette cards, that lot. A plate means nothing except that somebody owned a paste pot." It was a good theory. It had the advantage of being tidy and the disadvantage of being wrong. And Cleo, walking back past Persephone with her hands in her pockets, could not yet have said how she knew the second part. On Saturday she went through the Highgate boxes, flyleaf by flyleaf, on the theory that if the clearance trade was moving herons about, some might have flown her way. 41 books, 4 book plates, no herons. The Highgate Don had favoured a stag and had owned every book the ledgers said he had paid for. On Sunday evening, Vivian came and sat in her chair by the cold fireplace while Cleo priced. "When you find them," she said, "and you will, because you are your ledger's sort of person, be slow about it." Cleo looked up. "Slow?" "People bring things back for reasons," said Vivian. She drank her tea, and the steam let the lamplight through, and she said nothing else all evening. The third Monday sorted the sequence question, or rather made it worse. Barchester Towers, cloth, the spine bumped at the foot, 1857. She added it to the list under the other two, and the list, asked a third time, said nothing new. Not the alphabet, not the years the books were written. Somebody's order and nobody else's. But that morning Boswell's ears had gone round like weather vanes a full minute before the letterbox moved. Cleo, halfway down the stairs, had stood still and listened. A bicycle bell, 2 streets off, rung once at somebody. Then nothing. Then the flap, and the soft arrival of paper on the mat, and then, receding in the direction of Guildford Street, the bell again. She stood on the stairs until the sound was gone. Boswell looked at the parcel, and then at her, and then lifted the half-white forepaw and washed it, A job done, an interim report filed. That night she wound the alarm clock on the kitchen shelf, the tin one which had been Vivian's and lost 8 minutes a week out of loyalty. She set it for 6:45. Monday could come as early as it liked. Chapter 3. The Bicycle Bell. The alarm clock, having lost its 8 minutes somewhere in the week, went off at 7:10, convinced it was 1:45. Cleo was already up. She had been up since 6, in the dark of the shop, doing the things a person does when they are trying not to look like an ambush, straightening the counter, moving a chair an inch, deciding against the chair. She brewed the tea herself in the kitchen at the back and drank it standing up. Boswell took the counter. He sat facing the door, tail arranged over the half-white forepaw, and did not once ask what they were waiting for. Vivian was at the classics, rearranging nothing. "I am not waiting," she said, to a question nobody had asked. "I'm seeing to the shelf." "Of course. The shelf wants seeing to." At 7:20, the bicycle bell came down the street and stopped. A shape crossed the door glass. The flap lifted, and a parcel came halfway through the letterbox and stayed there, because Cleo had opened the door with the other end of it still in the sender's hand. They looked at each other over the parcel. The woman on the step was 50-odd, in a yellow cycling cape with the hood down, and she had the expression of someone who has rehearsed for this and resents that the rehearsals are over. "Ah," she said. "You'd better come in," said Cleo. "The kettle's not long boiled." The woman propped her bicycle against the lamppost, where Boswell could supervise it through the window, and came in. She stood in the middle of the shop and turned round once, the whole way, taking her time about it. "So this is it," she said. "He talks about this room the way other people talk about Venice." "Who does?" "My father." She put out her hand. "Ruth Otway." "Iris's granddaughter," said Cleo, and Ruth stopped with her hand out and blinked. "He said you'd catch me, and he said you'd have done the reading. He said, 'She's a cataloguer, Ruth.' He meant it the way other men say guard dog." She shook the hand she was given. "I told him 3 weeks at the outside. I've had 5. Cleo made a second pot, and they sat by the cold fireplace, the parcel between them. 3 men in a boat when they opened it. The Heron. The pencil. £1.50. Her father was Cyril Otway, and he had been a conductor on the 68 for most of his working life. He read on the top deck between stops, she said, and at the depot, and at the kitchen table with his tea going cold, and he had come to this shop from the year it opened, Tuesday evenings, because the 68 put him down at Holborn, and the walk home could be bent this far out of shape without anyone at home minding. "There's a shelf in his front room," said Ruth. "He calls it the pension. Every book on it came from here." She looked at the fireplace rather than at Cleo. "And he never paid for one of them." The shop was quiet for a moment. Somewhere at the back of it a shelf was being seen to. "He's dying," said Ruth, in the voice practical women keep for the fact, having found the other voices no use. "He's put his affairs in order, as much as they'll take it. The books are the last of it. There's a list, and I take one off the shelf every Sunday when I visit, and it goes through your door on the Monday, in order. He was particular about the order. Not the alphabet, he said, and not the dates. She'll see it, he said. The order he read them in." Ruth nodded. He was pleased about that. First thing he's been pleased about in weeks. She turned the cup on its saucer. He'd sooner die than knock, you understand, and he hasn't time to do both. Cleo let that one settle. It had been said dry on purpose, the way her own family said the worst things, and she took it as offered. "The book plates," she said. "Gran's. She taught him to read, off her own shelf, twopenny dreadfuls and then better. He had her plates by the boxful when she died." Ruth shrugged. "He says books belong to people who came by them honestly. Gran did. So they were hers, and he was minding them. He's got an answer like that for everything. It's why my mother left, and it's why she rings him every day. And the prices in pencil? What prices? Said Ruth. So she didn't know that part. Cleo poured more tea instead of answering and asked what the shop could do. Nothing, that's the whole of it. He wants them back on the shelves and no fuss. He wants to know the damage, he's put money by, but he won't come and he won't write, so I'm to ask. For the first time, she looked unhappy about her errand. I know how it sounds. Tell him the account is older than both of us, said Cleo, and I'll need to consult the ledgers. Ruth looked at her for a moment. He'll like that, she said, and stood and did up the cape. At the door, she stopped. There are 11 on the list. You've had 4. And then there's a 12th he isn't sending, and that one's his business, so I'd rather you didn't ask. She went out to the supervised bicycle and rang the bell once at Boswell, through the window, which he permitted. Cleo shut the shop that evening and told it all to Vivian, who sat at the window seat with her own cup and listened the way she read, without interrupting, to the end. Cyril, she said at last, Tuesday evenings, corduroy jacket, and a way of handling a book like a man washing a christening gown. The steam off her tea let the lamplight through. He read faster than he could pay. I knew it by the spring of '86. You let him. I sold to him, said Vivian, with the particular dignity she saved for shaky ground. At my own prices, on my own terms, from my own shelves. Slowly, to a good home. Any bookseller will tell you that is the whole of the art. She looked at her tea. The ledgers were never the whole story. I did tell you. You priced the shelf for him for the better part of 40 years. He came on Tuesdays, said Vivian, as if that were the same thing, and in her mouth it almost was. Cleo washed the pot and the 2 cups that needed it. When she came back through, the lamp was still on behind the counter, and Vivian was where she had left her, looking at the shelves the way she looked at things that were further away than the room. There's a 12th book, Cleo said. The one he isn't sending. Ruth wouldn't say which. No, said Vivian. She wouldn't know which. He'll not have told her. She turned her cup once on its saucer, her own small habit, 50 years old and not stopping for death. But readers like him always save one, the big one. He'll have been saving it for the end of the route. Chapter 4. The Last Volume. On Sunday the shop was shut, which was as well because the shop was making a house call. Ruth came at 2 with the bicycle, and Boswell, who had watched the basket for a week through the window, permitted himself to be put in it. He sat upright the whole way down Marchmont Street, with his ears going like a pair of independent instruments, and the look of a cat who means to file a complaint and is saving it for the right department. Cleo walked behind with a box of books. 4 of them wore Herons. Cyril Otway lived 2 floors up, in a flat where a bed had been moved into the front room so that it faced the shelf. The shelf was the first thing she saw before she had taken proper account of the man in the bed, and she understood the order of that only later. Gaps like missing teeth. 7 books still standing, a gibbon among them, leaning on each other where their neighbours had gone. On the bedside table, next to a conductor's ticket punch gone bright at the handle from 40 years of use, lay a book too fat for the shelf's remaining spaces. Middlemarch, of course it was. The room smelled of toast and clean laundry. On the mantel stood a photograph of a woman in a schoolmistress's collar, holding her spectacles as if about to make a point, and beside the photograph, in a small frame of its own, a heron among reeds. The plates had not been Iris Otway's vanity then. They had been her son's idea of a monument. The man in the bed was small in the way that big men become, and his eyes went from Cleo to the box and stopped there. "You'll be the cataloguer," he said, "and you'll be the reader." That settled something. He nodded at the box. "You've brought the bill?" "I consulted the ledgers," said Cleo. She set the box down where he could reach it. "There's nothing in them. There never was. I know what I took, and I know what was sold. Slowly, to a good home." She took Cranford off the top and opened it to the flyleaf, where beneath Vivian's price there was now a second figure, which was no figure at all, a naught, and the pound sign before it done in a single stroke. 11 years of reading a hand, and some things you catch. The rest are on the same terms. They're yours on loan, indefinite. The shop doesn't lend, so I'll ask you not to spread it about. Cyril looked at the naught for a long time. A corduroy jacket hung on the door, waiting, the way jackets wait. "There was a message," said Cleo, "from the previous management. Word for word, so don't blame the messenger. Tell him the gibbon was underpriced on purpose, and he still owes me for the teacup he chipped in 1991. He laughed, once, the laugh costing him something in air, and then he was not laughing. He looked at the jacket on the door, and then at the window, and his thumb went over the ticket punch. An old fare taken. "She knew," he said. By the spring of 86. 40 years I sat in that shop thinking I was clever. His voice was a conductor's voice still, pitched to carry up a staircase, worn down to the top deck's last row. I used to think, if she'd once said something, anything at all. "She did," said Cleo. "She said it in pencil." Ruth, in the doorway, turned and went to see about tea. Boswell chose this moment to conduct his inspection. The box, the shelf, the gaps in the shelf, each one measured to his satisfaction, and then the bed, which he got onto and settled on as though the whole visit had been got up on his instructions and was at last being run to time. Cyril's hand found the cat's back. "Vivian Marchmont," he said, to nobody in the room. Over the tea, which Ruth brought strong enough to stand a spoon in, he asked his questions. Was the ladder still on the rail? Did the fireplace still hold the idea of a fire? Did the philosophy section still hold the middle of the floor, where a man could stand out of the draught with the whole shop round him? Cleo answered each one, and he took the answers the way he had taken fares, without hurry, making sure of the change. "Tuesdays," he said at last to his tea, and let the rest of the sentence go where sentences like that go. Before they left, he had Ruth fetch down a shoebox of his mother's bookplates, and he took one out and gave it to Cleo, the Heron patient among its reeds, and did not explain, and was not asked to. At the door she said, "See that he finishes it," and Ruth said, "He's frightened to start it," and neither of them said anything else, because between two sentences like that, there is nothing to stand on. Finally, he started it. Ruth reported as much by telephone the following week. A chapter a night, read aloud, she said, to the cat when the cat could be delivered, and otherwise to the jacket. Boswell went down in the basket on Sundays after that, a standing arrangement, and came back smelling of another man's tea. On the Monday there was no parcel, and on the Mondays after that. At 20 to 8, Boswell sat facing the door all the same, tail over the half-white forepaw, keeping the appointment in case it kept itself. The letterbox stayed quiet, having said what it had to say. Some weeks later, a postcard came at a civilized hour, with a stamp, in a hand Cleo did not know and understood at once. It said, "He finished it." She read it aloud in the shop. Vivian, at the window seat with her cup, made a small, approving sound and looked out at the street for a while, and then went to see to the shelf, which wanted seeing to. Cleo pasted the Heron that evening into the shop's guard book, the stout album kept for cuttings and keepsakes, on a page of its own, and wrote nothing under it, the ledgers never having been the whole story. Then she took Cranford and set it in the window facing the street where the light would find it in the morning. It was priced at nothing, and it was not for sale. That was The Ex Libris, a Bloomsbury Bookshop Mystery by Imogen Penrose. Some books refuse to go through the till. This was one of them, and it is my thank you to readers of the newsletter, yours to keep. If you would like to spend a little longer in the shop, the series proper begins with Murder at Marchmont and Bell. On the morning Cleo means to reopen, she comes down to find a dead collector among the Russian novels, a ghost on the stairs who declines to leave, and a cat who has opinions about all of it. If you would like to read on, the first book is waiting, Murder at Marchmont and Bell. The link is in the description below. And if this is where you came in, welcome. There is a new first chapter here for every book in the series. Boswell would like you to subscribe. Boswell would like a great many things. Until next time, from Bloomsbury.